Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, or good evening, I should say. I am Amy Randall, Professor of History, Chair of the History Department, and Associate Director of the Center for Arts and Humanities at Santa Clara University. Michelle Burnham, the CAH Director, and I would like to welcome you to today's discussion, Translating the Past and Future into the Screen, Latinx and Black Cinema and Television. Before we begin our conversation today, I'd like to invite you to pause to acknowledge that Santa Clara University occupies the unceded traditional homeland of the Ohlone and Muwekma Ohlone people, who trace their ancestry through the missions Dolores, Santa Clara, and San Jose. I invite you to reflect on the truth of the violence of settler colonialism that they endured. And because Santa Clara University is an educational institution built around the Mission Santa Clara, I'd like you to consider what an institutional and community commitment to uncovering this truth might be and might look like. Today, I also invite you to remember the Ohlone and Muwekma Ohlone people's connection to this region and give thanks for the opportunity to live, work, learn, and pray on their traditional homeland. Let us take a moment to pay respect to their elders and to all Ohlone peoples of the past and present. It is with great pleasure that I introduce our panelists today. We are lucky to have the opportunity to talk with two alumnae, both of whom, by the way, took history classes with me, as well as one of Santa Clara University's talented professors. So let me first start by introducing Mallory Howard. Hi, Mallory. Mallory is a 2014 Communication Department graduate at Santa Clara University. She was previously a screenwriter and story editor for the TV series In the Dark. More recently, she was a writer on a Marvel project that is set to release sometime next year. Mallory is currently in development on an animated series as well as a live-action fantasy series. Catherine Tolentino is a 2011 English Department graduate of Santa Clara University. She's the founder and executive producer at Border Woman Pictures, a film production company dedicated to amplifying the voices of underrepresented groups, particularly women of color. Her short films have screened at Palm Springs Short Fest, Short of the Week, Amuleto, and Hamptons International Film Festival, among many others. She holds an MFA in Cinema Arts from Brooklyn College and is currently in development on her future directorial debut, Boyle Heights. Juan Velasco Moreno is a professor in the Department of English, where he teaches courses in creative writing and Latinx literature. His first novel, Enamorado, was published in 2000, followed by two other novels, Massacre of the Dreamers in 2011 and Paradise Lost in 2019. With David Pace in 2008, he published a multimedia DVD of poetry and photography, Call Me When I'm Gone. In addition to these works, Juan's short stories and poetry have been published in multiple venues around the world. He's currently hosting a blog right here, right now at Santa Clara University, and also working on a memoir. For Juan, the act of writing is deeply connected with the act of sharing, healing, and social justice around the world. Those connections have led Professor Velasco to create the NGO Programa Velasco in 2007, whose mission is to promote education and economic empowerment for children and women in El Salvador. This year, Juan is also a faculty fellow in the Center for the Arts and Humanities. So as we begin our conversation today, again, welcome to the audience. And there are so many questions that I want to ask, but I want to just first start off with, how did you, all of you, become interested in working on films and TV shows and screenplays, and why do you think it's important to do this work?
I can start. I have a pretty easy answer to that question. I first became interested at Santa Clara University, taking a couple of different classes. I took a Intro to Women's and Gender Studies with Professor Sharmila Lodia, and then I took classes with both of you. I remember taking a class on border literature with Professor Velasco and the history of sexuality with you, Professor Randall. And those three classes truly, opened my eyes to the way that women, and also particularly women of color, have been portrayed in media in the past. And I don't think that I was fully aware of that until taking those classes. And that's what really sort of sparked the desire in me to change those narratives.
I always wanted to be in film and television since I was little. I feel like my legacy starts with my mom. She was on the Paramount lot as a showrunner's assistant when she was pregnant with me. So she didn't actually wind up pursuing her film career, but I think that storytelling gene just stayed in the family. At one point, I thought I wanted to be a novelist, which didn't work out. I don't have the patience to write a book, but I took like a really amazing, I took amazing film courses at Santa Clara through the communications department, and simultaneously pursuing a minor in history. And I think those two together just made filmmaking so much more rich. And it became more than just like a visual artistic medium. I realized, similar to Kat, just the messages that are sprinkled throughout entertainment and how it can affect culture. And I think that became my driving passion.
Yeah, I think Kath and Mallory are making very important points that, how we are inspired by others and other people around us. And also, I've been thinking a lot about how do we impact culture, especially it's been really hard the last few years, the last couple of years with COVID and everything else, and even all the crises that we are living in the world today, starting right now. And even though many of my years of production have been also in academic books and literature, I think this is a moment when our world really, what they're hungry for is for stories, and the kind of stories that are inspiring, the kind of stories that are positive, the kind of stories that bring joy, and also lessons on how to be human. So when this opportunity came for me, the opportunity to apply for the Center for the Arts and Humanities, I thought about the Salaria Keys story. I've been reading about her for many years, and I decided to apply and become a fellow, and I'm working on a screenplay right now. But I really think that the world is hungry for stories right now, and that's what we need.
Thank you. And this really leads into my next question, which is you are all interested in promoting narratives and stories that haven't been told before or aren't told frequently, particularly stories that feature Black and Latinx voices and communities, but also or including, I should say, stories about joy, about the history, about community among those communities and voices. So I'm wondering how this interest in promoting narratives and stories that haven't really been told, how does that inform what you're working on right now? And can you tell us a little bit more about your current projects?
Okay, I'll go. I think for me, when it comes to stories that haven't been told, my perspective looks to the future, or just worlds that we haven't seen Black and brown people in. So I've grown up loving Westerns and adventure films and putting like a Black, Latinx, Asian character in an Indiana Jones type role, things like that, where people of color, specifically young people of color and young girls and young queer kids, like being able to see themselves in roles that aren't traumatized and aren't abused, and find joy in their perspective and see how they can connect to other people and how other people can connect to them, but their identities bring nuance to the story. And I think that's what makes those stories stand out and a little bit different. Currently, I'm working on an animated series and a fantasy series, and both are set in the Pacific Northwest where I grew up. There aren't a lot of Black people here, but we do exist. And I really need people. There's this passion of mine to show people of color, specifically Black people living in other cities other than, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, and showing a lot of Black and brown kids who grew up maybe in the inner city, never thinking about like, we can go camping or let's go backpacking this weekend. Like that is totally accessible to every person. And I want my stories to like open up the world to people of color.
I'll go. Well, as I was mentioning, I was totally taken by Salaria Key. She's a African-American nurse who was the only Black nurse who was able to join the fight of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade in Spain. Like Mallory was saying, she's interested in the future and more interested in historical films. And of course, past and future, they feed each other. That's the title of our webinar. And we can talk more about that, how future is helping us to learn from the past and how the past can help us to create a better future. But I love her story because it's a story of love and solidarity in the midst of struggle against the evil of fascism. And I'm very interested in this topic because my father's family was completely destroyed by fascism during the Spanish Civil War. And I've seen that, how even from one generation to the next, we still carry the wounds of that era of the 1930s. And I'm reminded, one of the professors at UCLA, a historian who has written a lot about the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, he says, his name is Robin Kelly, and he says that if we were going to understand World War II as a global struggle against fascism, then the conflict will have to start in 1936. And he goes back to that era of the Spanish Civil War. And what is interesting for me is that I don't know how many people know the Abraham Lincoln Brigades. This is a group of nearly 3,000 Americans who basically quit everything to go and join the struggle. And for me, what I like about Salaria Key and many of the men and women who were there is that this is kind of a story of people that were there not just to defend a weaker country, but to defend humanity. And to me, that's a very important project, especially nowadays. As we speak, we have Russian tanks invading another country. So how do we learn from the past? How do we prevent things to happen again in the future? And there is, but one of the things that I like about the story of this nurse is that there is a lot of joy too, a lot of grace in the midst of the struggle. She was Catholic, and I don't know, it was very interesting to just imagine her there in Spain in the 1930s, meeting other African-American heroes like Oliver Law, who was the first commander to lead the fully integrated United States Army. A lot of details of history that needs to be rescued and need to be told. And yeah, that's the project I'm working on right now.
I am in a very early nebulous stage of a project right now. I actually meant to write to you, both of you, Amy and Juan, and take that last line out of my bio. I was attached to a project that was a lot more defined called Boyle Heights. but that's sort of dissipated at this point, which is a shame, because I'll just briefly share that that story is one that I'm still really passionate about, which is, it was a film about the forced sterilization of Mexican American women in LA in the 1970s, which I think is a part of our American history that a lot of people are not aware of. And forced sterilizations continue today. And it's the kind of story that I would love to see more of, just because I think that, you know, the truth needs to get out there more. I was telling people about that project when I was involved with it, and so many people just had no idea about that reality. But in any case, so that project, I'm not moving ahead with that project at this point for all kinds of reasons, but I have been thinking a lot about what's sort of going through my mind right now is springing from my mixed identity. I'm half Asian American, half Latin American. And I've been thinking a lot about what is lost in my parents and my grandparents coming to this country from other cultures, and how to be American when my ties to my heritage are so frail, and what that kind of looks like. I spent a lot of time in El Salvador over the course of my life, and just kind of realized on my last trip there in November that the path for me to really connect with that culture, the language, and my family, it's never been easy. It's a lot harder than I thought it was going to be, basically. And so I'm sort of coming to a point now where I realize that, you know, I'm living in America. I was born in America. My family raised me to assimilate into American culture. And there's some positives to that, and there's some negatives to that. So what I'm working on right now is a very nebulous, I'm just basically journaling a lot, and we'll see if that becomes a film or an essay or what, but that's where I'm at.
Thank you all for sharing some of your thinking about your current projects. And I'm actually really interested in hearing more both about, Kath, your project on, or potential project on, something to do with the question of identity and the past, and making your way as an American citizen of mixed heritage. And I'm also really interested in hearing more about how the past and future feed each other. What, Juan, what you were talking about before. You know, we're uncovering the sort of, the goal can be, it sounds like for some projects here, to uncover the past, and that can be to uncover stories of violence like the forced sterilization of Mexican American women. It can also to be uncover stories of love and solidarity and resistance to fascism, more positive stories, but then also kind of imagining a future that is different from the one that we have experienced in this country, and the one that people of color are currently experiencing in the last few years and today. And not just people of color, but people all over, you know, who want to have a different kind of American identity or community or way forward, right? That's really different from where we are at the moment. So I guess I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit more about how the past and the future feed each other, and then also how maybe, Kath, for you just to think about telling us more about, you know, what kind of maybe projects that you can imagine that would speak to your interest in this question of identity right now. You mentioned, you know, a short story, or writing, or a screenplay, or directing, or, but to speak a little bit more about the different possibilities for that kind of a story.
I can briefly touch on your first question, and Juan and Mallory, if you want to chime in there as well. I mean, in relation to like the past and the future, just one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is I spent my whole young life so pissed off at my parents for raising me speaking English and not teaching me Spanish. my mom is Chinese American, but she also was raised speaking English, so she doesn't speak Chinese either. And I just always felt like that was a huge mistake, and like it really kind of severed, you know, whatever kind of connection I could have with my family in El Salvador and my culture there. And it wasn't until like this year, like literally last week, when I finally came around to understanding their perspective and why they chose to raise me that way, and why my mom was raised speaking English, and I have empathy for it now. And you know, this idea of wanting to I don't know, how we deal with our otherness, right? Like everyone has different ways of dealing with it, and in recent years we've learned to sort of be proud of that and wear it proudly. But when my mom was growing up, she was like really ashamed of it or freaked out by it, you know. And so that motivated her, I guess, my parents' choice. I don't know if I'm just babbling, or if Juan and Mallory, if you want to share your thoughts on that. But those are my thoughts on past and present and future. And like, I finally was like, oh, I understand my parents now at this age, you know.
For me, it's about using past narratives and maybe even current narratives to create story within a future world or another world. For example, I find that a lot of the people who need these messages are more likely to receive them in like a mask of like Star Wars or comedies, because things are just so heavy, especially now. And I think people, like Juan said, are looking for stories. And I think to a degree, some escapism as well. And if you can make those escapist stories rich with like real narratives that reflect reality, whether it's past or what's happening now, I think you can plant these seeds in people's minds that make them more receptive and see the world a little bit differently. Like to my mind, I think Avatar: The Last Airbender is one of the most brilliant shows ever written, but a lot on the surface, it looks like a kid's anime show, and it's so much more complex than that. And I think it speaks to like institutions and colonialism and things that like at 12 or 13 when I was watching it, I didn't know. And now like at 30, I'm like, holy shit, that's like the Fire Nation. And even with like Black Panther and Marvel, I think it speaks to a very specific experience in the Black community between Black Americans or Black people all over the world experiencing the diaspora and how we interact with like Africans who immigrate to these countries. And like generationally, we see ourselves so similarly, but I know having a lot of African friends, there's this like intense desire to be African, but also to be African American, and like those identities are conflicting sometimes. And I feel like Black Panther is like another way to have those conversations, and you can clearly see those themes, but you're more willing and excited to explore them with the amazing like world of Marvel and cool shit around it. So I think taking the past stories and putting them into future worlds is how I integrate those two.
Yeah, I agree with Kath and Mallory. I think it's very important to investigate both and not to know the answers. Just, have the question is probably the first step and maybe the only step. But as we look back, I remember in one of our previous conversations with Kath and Mallory, we were saying that when we look at within the past, the stories of the past, what comes out of that suffering. And I don't know if Mallory was saying something like, sometimes what comes out of it is beauty and taste and color. And for me, that's the way we can illuminate the future. Audre Lorde, I mean, it's very interesting because I'm right now for one of my classes, we're reading Audre Lorde and Sister Outsider. And it's very interesting because she talks about writing while facing your fears and writing while facing your anger. But then she says how that kind of writing gives us an insight into the future, and then it turns into illumination. That's the word she uses. And I'm very interested in that, like whether it is, like future films or films about the future. One of the films that I'm obsessed with, this is a Latinx film, is Children of Men by Alfonso Cuarón. And it's sort of like a dystopian film. But in there, I find so much humanity and grace and sacrifice and love. But also, as you are looking at the film, you are just realizing that this film about the future is about all of our sins in the past. It's about racism and misogyny and the way we treat immigrants and the way, sometimes we have so much pain that we don't know what to do with it and we just shut down. So I think it's very important to just go through that process of investigating the past and finding some sort of light that help us to tell the kind of stories that people will see as a path into the future. Otherwise, we fall into despair. And that's how I think past and future feed each other.
Thank you. And I think, Juan, what you're saying really directly relates to what Catherine was talking about in terms of, she's moving away from the Boyle Heights project for now, and maybe will return to it, but struggling with her own personal family history and the choices that were made, and trying to come to a place of understanding and empathy, but no easy answers, right? That can help to illuminate, right? As you were suggesting, and eventually what we're going to see, I think, from Kat is some kind of incredible, project or story that emerges from that many people can relate to and need to hear and want to hear. So I'm actually interested in the fact that Mallory and Juan both mentioned movies that they find particularly compelling or interesting. And so I guess I want to also ask to talk a little bit more about the screenplays and stories that you're thinking about writing, producing, directing. Are there particular models or examples that inspire you and that seem to speak to what you're trying to do, even if they might have some limits? So now the Black Panther, the Marvel movie, or the Children of Men movie. What are some other examples? And Kath, also, what comes to mind for you, since you haven't talked about a movie or TV series yet?
First of all, Black Panther has no limits. Black Panther is just like pure incredible. There is just, you cannot, it's so perfect. And just like enviably perfect, because like Crazy Rich Asians was so terrible. And it just makes me really sad. But touching on genre, I can talk about movies. Like, there aren't a lot of movies that I feel like capture the Asian American experience that I would love to see, or the Latinx experience that I can totally relate to. The narratives in the narratives for people of color are just so broad and so many. There's so many stories to be told that haven't been told yet. But I was thinking of actually like a graphic novel that I thought was really incredible called The Best We Could Do by Thi Bui, who's a Vietnamese American author. And her parents brought her over, during the war. And so they went through a lot. And it's like a very intense, but very genuine and heartfelt story about her processing her past and the grief and the losses that their family suffered. And that really spoke to me when I read it, simply because of how honest it was. That's always the kind of work that I find most interesting. Mallory, I'm always so just in awe of people who can like take honest, authentic experience and then weave it into something that doesn't exist, like something fantastical. Because I truly like have no idea how to make that leap. But in my own work, I spend a lot of time just like trying to write honest sentences and trying to identify what am I truly feeling and what am I experiencing right now.
I feel like the skill to put the stories in the future world came from like a deep childhood wound of like feeling very alone and having to create worlds in my head to make sense of things that were happening around me during those times. And it's something that never is completely gone away, but I think it's something that I made into like a positive rather than dissociating. It's more of just integrating it into my narratives. I think like a great example, Bong Joon-ho, like the way he talks about class in his films, like Parasite, Snowpiercer, Okja. I think that's like a really great example of taking like very like normal human experiences and then just adding so much like going extreme with it. I don't know if you guys have seen Snowpiercer, but it's like going through every train car and like talking about how class affects education, how it affects the elite and like food and everything by just like going through these train cars. It's so beautifully done. And I think also another great example in a weird, not in a weird way, but in a completely different way, is Hamilton. Just taking like an actual historical narrative, but then casting only people of color. There are definitely criticisms for it and against the production, but I think I think at this point, media needs more filmmakers and playwrights and writers and producers who want to see a different world and play in a different perspective for what our experiences look like.
Yeah, it is totally connecting with what Mallory and Kath was saying. What is fascinating about films is that you can totally recreate another world. And these other worlds sometimes happen in the future, in a future that looks like terribly similar to the present. And sometimes you can recreate the world in the past, and the past looks so much like the present, right, as well. And one of the films that I enjoyed the most was the United States versus Billie Holiday. And for me, Billie Holiday was always like a superwoman. It's like Black Panther, but in the 1930s. And seeing what Lee Daniels was doing with that world I was just so jealous. Like I wish, I could say, hey, come here and do this with Salaria Key. Let's do this. I definitely recommend that. And also the other films he had done, like Precious and The Butler, they're just fantastic. It just seems like it's teaching you to see the past in a different light. And like, again, you're illuminated into the present. You see something in there that helps you to see the world around you differently. And Lee Daniels is one of my favorite directors. And the other one that I will say also Guillermo del Toro, who has done a lot of futuristic films, and he's just fantastic. Whatever theme he touches, I really like it. I don't know. But the film that I also influenced me to just look at the 1930s. He touches the Spanish Civil War here and the struggle against fascism. Is Pan's Labyrinth, and it's pretty incredible because it's not just history; it just becomes an archetype, and the archetype is just kind of applied in so many different levels. So yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the ability of this writers and producers and directors to create this world and this story, and how this story helps you to illuminate and to see yourself in the world right now is what is helping us to imagine ourselves in a different future. And sometimes it's the future illuminating us into the present. So yeah, those films are definitely classics for me. I just keep going back to them over and over again.
I wanted to also not always be the one to ask questions here, so kind of open it up so that there's a more organic conversation among the three of you too. And so I'm wondering if you have questions or feedback in terms of, questions for each other and feedback in terms of what we've been talking about already.
So a question I might have for Mallory and Kath is, and this is probably very interesting for many students or people watching this webinar right now who are interested in writing, right? What is the process? Do you have a screenplay? What happens next in your experience? How do you go from writing something to seeing something on the screen? What would you say to anybody who is interested in doing this, pursuing this project?
That's a hard question. And Mallory and I are kind of we have different modes, right? Because Mallory, you're writing for TV, so there's a system that then goes on to create whatever it is that you're working on, which is amazing. And I'm more in the indie film space, so if I write a script, I'm needing to find a way to make it, on my own, through my own resources or through friends' resources, whatever that looks like. And frankly, I haven't made a short film in like 2 years, so I don't know. I really don't. It's kind of, I was reading a book the other day about how stories get made, and someone compared it to washing a pig. And you go in and you really don't have any kind of plan as to how to wash the pig. And you're kind of like, it's just going to be totally chaotic. And for a while, you're just like scrubbing and it's running off and it's getting dirty. And it's just eventually 5 or 7 hours later, you successfully washed the pig, but you have no idea how. That really resonates with me.
I am a very slow writer. It takes me years to finish like 60 pages of a pilot. My sister, she's also a writer. She also went to Santa Clara. She can like crank out a feature screenplay, which is like about 100 pages in a weekend. It takes me 3 years. But I feel like it shifts depending on the project and what I'm talking about, especially when it comes to world building. There are so many details that I think need to go into building a world that help you find the story. For example, one of the things that I'm working on right now is a fantasy, grounded fantasy. I like kind of pitch it as if girls are insecure, if those women had supernatural powers, like how would they live out their 20s? And then also what would they do with that responsibility if they can help people, but they want to, live their lives. And that conflict, especially for people of color, where it's like, when you make it, you got to carry the whole community on your back and you're like supposed to represent everyone, but you're still like your own person. And so the responsibility of power became like the major theme for me as I was building out that world. And it then built out into these power structures and institutions that we live in to this day. And so like, what would those institutions look like with some sort of supernatural element and divine element? Because they're demigods, that's why they have powers. But as I was like collaborating with one of the producers attached, she's very religious. She grew up Catholic, but her parents are from Ghana. And so she has like a very African spiritual perspective as well. And the way she interpreted so much of my world building had a cool spiritual element. And I feel like that's a very taboo and unexplored space in film and television because you don't want to offend anybody. But I think that is whether you are a spiritual person or not, it is like a part of humanity and history, present, and maybe even future, who knows? But being able to explore that landscape, I don't like, and like how Juan is, I don't have anything to say about it necessarily. I just want to explore it, and I want it to be authentic and honest. And so now, like, there's a religious and spiritual component to the conversation about power and institutions, and it's just made that whole story so much more rich.
I'm wondering about other questions that you might have for each other or comments.
I wanted to ask about your writing process, and I'm always interested in people's writing processes, but as you're working on this project about Salaria Key, like what research, how you're doing your research and how that's playing out for you.
Yeah, thank you, Kath. When I came into this project, I was a little bit hunted because this is something I wanted to do for years. And now that my dream came true, that the Center for the Arts and Humanities offered me the opportunity to do this, I was a little bit freaked out. And so first thing I did is, I just wanted to be sure who Salaria Key was and what really happened. So I spent a couple of months, the fall quarter, doing a lot of research. And I guess that's what we all do, right? You start doing a lot of research and a lot of writing around the research, like the Abraham Lincoln Brigades. I didn't know much about it. All the African Americans, Chinese, Mexican, Cubans who went part of the international brigades, and they were there. There was like 40,000 people there from all over the world. And it was just fantastic to do all that research. And after a while, I just gathered Salaria Key's story, or enough to be able to see sort of like a beginning, a middle, and an end. But that was only a biography. And one of the things that I learned when I was at UCLA, I studied in theater and film department, is that, if you have a few flashcards or index cards, you can go to a coffee shop and start imagining the story card by card, scene by scene. And that was so much easier for me to enter into the process of now imagining a film. And what I realized right away, and this has been part of my struggle, I'm still struggling with this. As I looked at my cards and I started working on a treatment, I realized that I didn't want an action, adventure, war film. I was more interested in the sort of like a quiet, psychological, spiritual, political journey for Salaria Key, and how one of the most incredible things for me is like, how did somebody in there who was 19 all of a sudden, working in a Harlem hospital in New York, she just left everything and went to this other country to fight oppression. So I wanted to develop more of that, her character, her face, the way she's also growing in the process of taking into this journey. And she encountered, even in the Americans, in the second American unit, she also encountered some racism in there. And what kind of strength does it take for somebody to stay, to defend humanity, to reclaim her humanity? So when I realized that that's what I wanted, that's when I also changed all my cards and all the project. And it's not a war film anymore. It's a little bit more quiet. and it's about Salaria Keys finding grace and love in the midst of war and in the midst of oppression and misunderstanding. So I'm in the treatment right now, but now I feel like I fully understand what she's going through and the struggles that she faced and how she became stronger and she became a hero. She's an African-American hero. There are 2 or 3 films already where she is one of the protagonists, but these are documentaries. And in the 1930s in Spain, she was in a lot of films, like Oliver Law, the commander of the African-American unit. So that has been my process of writing. I think the cards helped me to be less freaked out. And I was able to go to a coffee shop and hear a lot of noise around me and a lot of laughter. And this just writing my cards and put all my cards in front of me. And that's how I write. I need a lot of noise around me, and I need people around me. So
I'm the same way. I cannot write in silence in my room because then all of my insecure thoughts come and silence. I really like what you brought up though, Juan, about sort of using these index cards to also help find a structure, like a beginning, middle, and end. And that's something, because I've adapted real life stories before too, and I'm like also working on another adaptation of a real life story as well, and find that that is one of the hardest parts for me, is trying to fit it into this like narrative structure that's sort of like it's got that arc that is so, the standard accepted way of telling a story. And I wonder, Juan and Mallory, if you have thoughts on that. Like, yes, it serves us in so many ways, but sometimes it feels like I'm trying to like shoehorn something in. I wonder if, I don't know, is this whole idea of like a 3-act or 5-act or 8-act structure, is it 100% necessary, or can we break out of that? Tell me your thoughts.
Yeah, you can. Just as simple as that. I don't like rules. So I don't think that, I think sometimes having such a formal education can make you afraid to go outside of the box. But I think some of our favorite films, I think we can all say, were things that were unconventional for its time and like shook it up a little bit and stepped outside. And I think you can always do whatever the hell you want. So that's
great.
And I would just say it. I mean, I think in this, desire to have stories that are more authentic, more honest, and that speak to the different experiences of so many of us, and when we feel like we turn on the TV or watch a movie, and it's that's not what a real woman of a certain age would do, or what a real Latinx character would do in this type of a family situation, or what a queer person would consider, or how a woman would respond. And I end up turning off the TV and movies so frequently within 10 minutes because I just can't stand the inauthenticity and the kind of scripted roles and traditional narratives, standard structures that limit the story as well. And so I think you're, Mallory, you're absolutely right. You got to step outside and do something different. And I find it interesting that in reading, there are so many opportunities to step outside and to see those stories or read those stories and hear those voices, and a lot more possible authenticity. But I still feel like TV and cinema is so constrained. So I think your work is incredibly important, right, to be able to create these new paths and these new stories, and to really offer something different. So I'm excited to again see what all of you do. I was wondering, Mallory and Kath specifically, if you would talk a little bit more about your experiences of women of color in writing, producing, directing films and TV series, and to discuss some of the challenges that you faced and how have you navigated these challenges. Because imagining that you faced a lot of challenges and a lot of resistance to stepping outside the box, wanting to tell certain stories, problems with fundraising, and so on.
Kat, can you go first? I have to grab my charger. I'm so sorry for my lack of preparedness. 1 second.
Yeah, sure. Oh no. Oh, she just turned off her camera. I was worried she like left. Yeah, it's interesting because I think, what I've witnessed in the last few years is that there are so many opportunities with Hollywood trying to right the wrongs of the past. There are a lot of opportunities that are popping up for women of color, and there's also, there's a growing network of women of color that are operating in the film space and that can help each other out. So I haven't found, I guess it's always hard to tell, it's hard to tell, how objectively advantaged or disadvantaged one might be because you can only live in your own reality, right? But I would say my biggest struggle as a woman of color making work and expressing myself is like crippling self-doubt and the constant feeling that what I have to say is not worth saying, or that it's better to sit and listen than to use my voice. Those are the sorts of feelings that I think I battle with on a regular basis, and that I feel they come from, cultural ways of behaving that have been passed down. When I look at like how my grandmother, my mom's mom acts, she's very soft-spoken, does not take up space ever. And that's sort of how I grew up to sort of see, how women should or are meant to act. And so those sorts of thoughts that are very subconscious, but are very much a part of my daily life, they just take a long time to get over, and I think that's been a big part of my journey as a creator and a storyteller, is just getting my self-confidence up enough that I can continue to use my voice.
I think the biggest challenge that I've personally faced have to do with just identity politics and the expectation of me as a Black woman and the expectation of what I write. I come up against that from other people of color as well as white people, because especially in media, there's such a box around what a Black American is and what that looks like. And I really want to tell stories of Black people that don't fit the mold, quite like how we've explained it. And one of the stories I'm chasing right now, he's a Seattle legend. I live in Seattle. He's a Black man who literally put on a costume and decided to be a superhero, and his name is Phoenix Jones. And I'm obsessed with him. And if he's watching this, I don't know why he would be. Please call me. I want to talk more about like those Black experiences, because they are Black experiences and they do matter. And so when I pitch something like that in a room, people are kind of like, do you have anything that's like a little more Black? And they mean like gangs. When I grew up in Bellevue, Washington, as the only Black person, so I really don't know anything about that, but they kind of just expect, because I'm Black and my parents are from the South Side of Chicago, that I might know that world, which I don't. And I get turned down. I know that I've gotten turned down for a lot of opportunities because they just weren't interested in telling the people of color stories that I'm interested in and drawn to. And I didn't fit a specific image of what they think a Black woman should fit. And I think that's been one of the more challenging things for me to navigate, and simply because that's been a challenge of mine since I was a kid. So just seeing it manifest in the industry is sometimes disheartening, but it makes me want to, fight that much harder.
I'm interested in hearing this point that you made, Kat, about the growing network of women of color who are helping to support each other, and maybe will help to create more opportunities for the different types of stories that both of you want to tell, and the different types of stories, Mallory, that you want to tell about Black Americans. Can you talk a little bit more about that, or what are the possibilities of that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, in making the films that I've made in the past, and always from this, philosophical perspective of wanting to tell more stories about people of color that are authentic and true, when that philosophy is so much a part of what I do, I find that it's very easy to meet other people that think similarly, that want to help, that are interested in being a part of it, whether they're actors or, artists, or occasionally people who have money and who can fund projects like that. For one of my short films, I just happened to, like, through a friend of a friend, meet someone who was interested in supporting this kind of work, and was able to help fund the project. And those sorts of things really happen more often than you think. I've never read The Secret, and I don't use the word manifesting, but I do feel like when you truly know what it is that you're trying to achieve, and set a goal to do that, it makes it just so much easier to talk about that with people. And then those folks want to then help you out, if they can. And in the film industry, that also looks like, a lot of groups of folks that are starting to form to help each other out, whether it's on Facebook or over email. That just, if you look through, like, what is it? Black Girls Doc Mafia, or Brown Girls Doc Mafia, I'm sorry, is a great one. Or there's another Women of Color film listserv that I'm on. Gosh, I wish I could remember what it's called, but I literally get like 10 emails from them every day. And there's just like job listings and people looking for help and whatever. So finding those networks is the first step. And then once you do, gosh, there's a whole lot of people out there that want to support,
Yeah, I've come across a similar experience, and I think in the indie space as well, it helps a lot, because with the business of TV, and because so many things are released on streaming services, they have access to a lot of data, and so content is often driven by data. Like, we don't have women watching our stuff, where's our woman show? And they just get the most generic woman show. So sometimes when you're meeting with producers and studio executives who are more concerned about numbers and hitting demographic targets, it's really hard to find a community and network. But like Kath was saying, like, going outside of the industry sometimes and finding people through social media, even just like striking up conversations, like, especially if you're in LA, chances are people do something in the industry, and just striking up conversations with people, and being just a human to another human, outside of thinking about it as a business, I think really helps you find a network and community of people who look like you, or at least people who think like you.
Yeah, and I think this point about you're not always seeing it as a business project or commercial endeavor, but really about stories and connecting people to each other is key to pushing certain projects forward. But of course, it's hard to break out of that in Hollywood for sure, and in some other spaces. I think because Mallory and Kat, you've been in this world a little bit longer than Juan, who's finally venturing into this world. I'm wondering if you have any advice for him in terms of, once he completes his screenplay, how does he move forward with it? What is the advice that you have for him?
Oh, well, Juan, it depends on, so what's your goal for the film? Like, what do you want it to be? Because there's many different paths. Like, if you want it to be, if you want to maintain creative control and really make sure that it gets made the way you want it to get made, you might want to produce it as an indie film. But there's also opportunities maybe to work with a studio or a production company that could get you, you know, way more eyes. But in doing so, you might surrender some creative control there. Do you have thoughts on like where you'd want it to live?
I want to work with other people. I want to see other points of view. I would like to work on the final script with an African-American woman. That would be ideal. So we can find the true voice, or a voice that is very close to what I imagine Salaria is. And, you know, I'm just thinking that what I would like to see is many people working in a project that is multicultural and is multilingual. So it will be ideal to have a studio, I don't know, here in the United States, Hollywood, but even like having a co-production with somebody in Spain. So that's kind of an imagining. And of course, if I have like a magic powers, I will say I want Lee Daniels to do the directing. But yeah, I'm imagining a multicultural, multilingual production that can be done among 2 or 3 different countries. That will be my ideal. And I'm not like super possessive of my creative projects these days. I just feel like I get very passionate, and then I get really bored, and then I need like a lot of people to talk to. And that's what makes me really happy. That's how I keep my energy going. So I don't know if I answered the question, Kath, but yeah.
That's great. I love that you know that about yourself. Yeah, I don't know, Mallory, what are your thoughts?
I would definitely say once you feel like it's in a good place to share it with everyone that you trust and who you think has good taste. And you know, you just never know like who's connected to who can show it to the right people, because I do agree, just from looking at a production standpoint, like period pieces are very expensive. So having a studio is going to be really helpful for you, especially then they have access to like all these amazing Black women writers who can partner with you, or director Lee Daniels. And also like it's if you want to run some of them by me, but like script competitions, I actually have seen become really fruitful, and a lot of things got picked. I don't know if you know the blacklist, but a lot of things have been picked up from the blacklist by just getting really high scores. And I know you would get high scores because you're brilliant. So I think those 2 avenues are probably what my advice is, the best way to move forward once you have it in that place to share.
Thank you, Mallory. That's very useful. Definitely, I'll be sharing with everyone, and I'll be sharing with the 2 of you as well, just to get your point of view. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, script competitions, but be careful which one you choose, because some of them are not so good. So
okay, yeah, I'll be emailing you and getting some ideas very soon.
And for someone who doesn't know what you mean by a script competition, and maybe some audience members don't, could you just say a little bit more about what they are?
They vary. So a lot of times they might be created by production companies that have some sort of deal or agreement with studios that are just funneling money into their company, and they need to develop things. But sometimes if you don't do the research, you can get paired up, and or you could get your script taken away essentially, and the rights to it from somebody who like doesn't really know what they're doing or doesn't have good intentions. And I've seen a lot of writers get manipulated and exploited that way. It's really good to see. It's really good to do competition. Like Sundance has a script competition where you just submit your feature, and it also is a workshop as well, where you'll be invited to go to Sundance and work on your screenplay with professionals from agents to studio execs, managers, who can all give you insight and help you work your screenplay so it's in selling position. And then oftentimes just being in those workshops and in those competitions just give you exposure. Even if you don't wind up winning anything, it gives you exposure to people who can help you out, especially if they are really drawn to your content. But like Kath said, please email me if you want me to do some digging, because there are some scammers out there.
Yeah. The other thing too is, like you mentioned, the Sundance screenwriting fellowship. There are a lot of independent film festivals, both in the US and internationally, that have screenwriting labs or screenwriting fellowships. So depending on where you're at in the process of writing, there's fellowships that exist out there for every stage, whether you haven't started yet, or whether you have a finished draft, or whether you're pretty much done but still want to workshop it a little bit more. I wish there was like a reliable database, like, or list of those. It's one of those things that, like, over time I've kind of like developed more knowledge of, but only after like years of being in this industry and kind of realizing what opportunities are out there. But one, for example, that comes to the top of my mind is, I know the Hamptons International Film Festival has a script lab. And then for anyone in the audience who's Asian American, there's gosh, I can't remember now what it's called. I'll have to think about what it's called, but there's a writer's lab for Asian Americans as well, for Asian American scripts. That's, I'll see if I can find it. Anyway, there's so many. If you Google like screenwriting fellowships or screenwriting labs, you'll find all kinds of opportunities there. And sometimes it can be a little bit distracting from the work because you have to spend so much time writing these applications. But that's kind of, you know, unfortunately, it's like the nature of the beast. I mean, it's the same in academia or in, you know, for working artists. You kind of need to balance your time between creating the work and then trying to get it out there, right? So anyways.
So thank you. I think that, you know, Juan will benefit from the conversations with you moving forward and your experience and your expertise. I guess I'm wondering, I want to create some time for questions from the audience, but also to give you, I guess, the opportunity to reflect a little bit on, you know, how do you maintain a sense of self as you confront the industry, which often involves these standard structures and, you know, kind of typical stories and the racism, misogyny, homophobia that's wrapped up in that. How do you kind of maintain a sense of self and integrity, and how do you move forward with that, given that that's some of what you face, not necessarily on a daily basis, but certainly at times? And Juan, I think also just for, you know, maybe you to speak to, you know, advice you might offer some people in the audience about dipping your toes into an entirely new industry. I mean, I know you're a Renaissance man, you do poetry, novels, you know, all these different, you know, venues for your cultural production, but maybe you could speak to that too.
Okay, I'll go first then. Yeah, this is something new for me. So, but it's something I'm really passionate about. I've been thinking about this project for years and just reading different things in different venues. And what I will say, you know, definitely I don't know much about the film industry and I don't know where this story is gonna go. But as I think back also to publishing, whether it's in the academic world or creative writing, or even if you're an artist of any kind, you know, my sister is doing sculptures and paintings and installation art. And I will say that the main advice I give to everyone to my students, to myself, is that in moments of self-doubt, what I try to remind myself is that writing is not so much a product, or shouldn't be so much a product as it is a way of life. And for me, it means paying attention to the people around you, paying attention to the stories, paying attention to how do you want your life to be meaningful? How do you want your life and your stories change this world so the world in the future will be better for others? I try to focus on those things. So, like Audre Lorde is acknowledging, a woman who is a genius was acknowledging a lot of fear. So when I feel the same kind of fear because I'm encountering a new project, or I'm gonna try something different or something new, I'm also remembering or trying to keep in mind that next to your fear, you can have your joy. You can have those moments of grace, those moments of illumination that we talked about before. So that's what I'm thinking. I mean, whether you want to write or be an artist, or you just want to do a film, or you want to do a graphic novels, which I love graphic novels. They're incredible things, artists are doing these days. Just remember that this is going to become a way of life, and you don't have to be completely attached to whatever product you're working on right now. As long as you are being authentic to yourself, then you can keep going and take it moment by moment. That's,
yeah. It was just so good to hear you share that, Juan. Amy, I think you were asking about how we maintain our sense of self despite everything that we face. And I would say, like, where I really struggled with maintaining my sense of self actually was when I was living in LA and when I was living in New York, and I would get just so caught up in the industry of things and like the competition and the sort of where I felt I should be, at my age, or looking at my peers and just comparing. And I don't think I'm cut out for cities like LA. Like, I can't live in LA, and it took me a long time to sort of realize that I needed to put my health first, and that living with that kind of perspective was detrimental to my health. And this is like, it's just so, I don't know, coming back, like being on this panel with both of you, and then actually like coming back to the Santa Clara University reunion this year made me remember like what it is like to feel centered and remember my sense of self. And part of that could be that I'm like from the Bay Area anyways, and so I'm home, but also just hearing your words of wisdom and your perspective on life, Juan, and speaking with you, Amy, just brought me back and brings me back to like why I'm doing all of this to begin with, and it's not about accolades, and it's not about like an IMDb page or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, very, very similarly. I just try and be as mindful as I can in every situation and taking it moment by moment. When I'm met with a question or opportunity that's either more business driven or creative driven, I just check in with myself and I take my time to just know and figure out, does this feel good? Does this have a good impact on the culture? Does it align with who I am and what I want this world to look like? And when I go through that process in every single moment or opportunity that presents itself, I find myself so happy in the projects that I find. I haven't had, knock on wood, one negative experience in the industry necessarily, because the one time I didn't was because I didn't listen to my gut and I didn't check in. So yeah, I think just staying true to yourself and going internally and asking yourself those questions before making a decision. And like I said, just saying fuck it to the structures that be. And if you operate outside of it, like, that's even better.
Thank you. There's so much wisdom among the three of you. I just want to listen and talk for hours, but and thank you for all that you've offered to our audience. I do have a question from the audience, so I'll just read it. The question is, what are your thoughts on arts education in California? What do you recommend to students of color who may not get the best arts education to grow in passion projects or fall in love with the arts? So, you know, if you don't get the best arts education, but you want to pursue these projects, how do you recommend moving forward, and what do you think about arts education in California, and maybe what needs to happen or what would be good to happen?
It's hard to make a judgment on arts education in a whole state, but I think when it comes to education anywhere, it is what you make it. You get what you put into it, and depending on your ability, your access, and your ability, it might take a little bit more work and research and strength and energy to find the things that you want to learn. But for me personally, Google's my best friend. I'll get as specific as like existentialist film art from the, like, things like that, and then you'll find other people, like whether it's on Reddit, YouTube, whatever, people who are into that very weird specific thing that you're into as well, if you're trying to have like a more diverse or avant-garde perspective on creating an art. When it comes to formal training, if you're trying to like understand story structure, you're trying to know how to just properly format a screenplay, and maybe you don't have the finances to get Final Draft, which is a script writing software, and it costs like too much money. There are free online ones. I used to use Writer Duet, and it's free, and there's a whole, like, it saves to a cloud. So if you're on a different laptop, maybe you don't have a laptop, or you can only go to the library, like your scripts are saved there. So there are so many ways where you can educate yourself if you're not satisfied with what you are being met with in whatever like established institution you're in.
Yeah, Mallory, I like what you said earlier too, that sometimes like formal education can be stifling and make you feel as if you have to do things a certain way. I always have felt really strongly that arts should be taught in schools, and I'm sad to see that it's not a high priority for a lot of school districts. I don't really know the state of it right now in California, but I think back to when I was in high school and in college, and just what resources were available in the community, you know, even if it wasn't through whatever school I was attending. I remember in San Jose, for example, one of my friends got really into slam poetry because she would go to Makla all the time in downtown, and just got in with a network there and started getting up on stage and telling her stories, you know, every weekend. And it didn't cost anything, and she didn't need to take a class for it, but she just befriended some of the people in that community and developed a passion for it that way. Or when I was in high school, because I was interested in movies and TV, my mom told me about the local cable station in Mountain View called KMBT, where you could volunteer to like work on just some dinky show that like 10 people might watch, you know, but it was so cool because you're like in a real studio and learning how to operate a real camera, and all of the people there were just, you know, people who were into it and weren't doing it professionally, but just had a passion for it. And it didn't cost anything. It was totally free. You know, there's community art centers that offer great classes. And also, if you're into movies and TV, if you haven't heard of Canopy, Canopy spelled with a K, it's like Netflix, but 100 times better. You don't have to pay for it. It's offered through the public library. And all of the movies that are on there are just like phenomenal. They have a great selection. End rant.
Yeah, I agree with everything Mallory and Kat. They just said, I mean, really great advice. I cannot add anything else except, I mean, the old style when I was growing up, there was not one single book in my house. So whatever little money I could get every Sunday, I will just save it. And then slowly I was just getting books and reading everything I could. And I really believe in that. Just, I don't know how much formal education does really. As long as you keep reading and reading and reading, follow your heart, then you find your voice. And once you find your voice, you just keep writing. Every day you write and write and write. And that's how eventually you become the artist that you want to be. We don't need a title. I don't think we need more titles. I think it's a matter of, like I was saying before, it's just finding that this is your way of life and this is the way you are gonna be in this world for the next few decades, whatever years are left for you. So that will be my advice. Is like, yeah, if you can get some formal education, of course, get it. Webinars like this with Mallory and Kath are very important. But also you have to write every day and you have to do the work every day. And as long as you can do it, you're gonna find your voice and you're gonna find a way of doing it.
And I would just add, you know, think about the Santa Clara core and the requirements to complete your education here. And, you know, there's one arts requirement. And, you know, what if we had a university where there were 3 or 4 or even just 2 and you had to take them within your first 2 years? The number of people who might discover, hey, I really have a passion for drawing, or I have a passion for dancing. But, you know, it's because the arts is not promoted in the same way as other disciplines, and also not promoted in terms of K through 12 education. There are a lot of amazing, you know, talent, very talented people out there in terms of potential arts paths and careers who will never discover that they could do these things or that they have the passion for these things because they're, you know, following what they need to do just to get through the end of the day and get a BA, or, you know, finish the 8th grade or whatever. So, and that's an unfortunate effect of the values of our society, which are reflected directly in our educational curriculum. So,
Yeah,
go ahead.
it's really sad when I meet people who tell me like, oh, I can't believe you work in the arts. I've always had a dream of working in the arts, but I can't make the leap. You know, I don't want to leave my really high paying tech job, or I worry about what my friends and family might think, or, you know, it's like people don't want me to do this. It makes me really sad. A life in the arts is difficult, but it's not impossible. I have a friend who's an incredible painter, like just incredible painter. And she didn't study painting at all. She just has a really good eye. And she works for Google. And I just like feel really sad every time I think about it. Like, you could be doing so much, you know, and you're just like a cog in this wheel. But to each their own.
Yeah, and just speaking from personal experience, I was so intimidated by going into the arts that after I graduated, I went into the tech space, and I was copywriting, so I told myself it was still creative. but it wasn't what I wanted to do like at all. And just my first year post-college, working in an industry that I didn't care about or wanted to even climb the ladder in, just completely drained me of not only my energy, but like hope and happiness. And I went through the worst depression of my life that ended with me in a psychiatric hospital. And it was art and writing that helped me get through that experience. And I actually wound up making it a screenplay, which kind of became my calling card in the industry that helped me get my foot in the door, because it was an honest reflection of mental health for me, and then just like the Black community in general, because it's not something we talk about. And so after that experience, I was working at a talent agency. I was getting, I left my job with stock options and benefits and got paid $10 an hour and had to drive Uber on the side. But I was like so happy because I knew everything I was doing was I was working towards something that I actually cared about and that it was actually driving me. And so even though I was stripped of all of these luxuries that working in tech gave me, I was on like cloud nine the whole experience, even the hard times, because I knew I was actually working towards something I loved and cared about.
Thank you for sharing that story. It's incredible. And you know, I hope our audience is listening very carefully to all the different ways we can try to pursue our dreams and to inject more joy in our lives and not be slaves to capitalism and cogs of the machine. Thank you everyone, Kat, Juan, Mallory, for this conversation today. It's been really interesting, and I know that there might be more questions, but we are basically at the end of our time here. So you know, I don't know if I should say if anybody wants to get in touch with any of you, please contact the Center for Arts and Humanities, and then we can relay contact information. And any parting words?
Just thank you for the opportunity, and I'm so glad to see how many people were here on the call, and I hope that you all found it helpful. Definitely, please feel free to reach out if you want to get in touch.
Yeah, just want to echo that. I'm really grateful for this time to talk about this. I learned so much from Juan and Kat every time we talk, and it was so great to see you again, Amy. I just encourage everyone to be themselves, and don't be afraid of the systems and the institutions that have been built around the arts. They're crumbling anyway right now, so just do your thing and be yourself. And I'm also happy to answer any questions and connect via email as well.
Yeah, I just learned a lot from Kath and Mallory, and I'm very grateful for your work, Amy. Thank you so much for organizing this for us. And yeah, any departing message is, you know, I think sometimes we have to choose between fear and love. And, you know, we pay the price if we choose fear. So I will say that if anything, I think Kath and Mallory are very good examples of two very strong women who know how to follow their dreams and follow their gifts and their hearts. So I hope this has been inspiring for everybody.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. And thank you to the audience for sticking with us. Most of you stuck around for a long time, and I really appreciate that. Have a good evening, everyone. We'll see you for lunch sometime soon.
Can't wait.